Hello, welcome. If this is the first time we've met, my name is Grant Koper. For story time this week, I thought we would start one of my favourite books, which is The Twits. If you've got it, go and grab it, read it along with me, and if you don't have it, don't worry, I'll be reading it to you. So, let's get going. The Twits, by Roald Dahl. Illustration by Quentin. Chapter 1. Hairy Faces. What a lot of hairy-faced men there are around nowadays. When a man grows hair all over his face, it's impossible to tell what he really looks like. Perhaps that's why he does it. He'd rather you didn't know. Then there's the problem of washing. When the very hairy ones wash their faces, it must be as big a job as when you and I wash the hair on our heads. So, what I want to know is this. How often do all of these hairy-faced men wash their faces? Is it only once a week, like us, on Sunday nights? Do they shampoo it? Do they use a hairdryer? Do they rub hair tonic in to stop their faces going bald? Do they go to the barber and have their hairy faces cut and trimmed, or do they do it all themselves in front of the bathroom mirror with nail scissors? I don't know. But next time, when you see a hairy-faced man, which will probably be as soon as you step out onto the street, maybe you will look at him more closely and start wondering about some of these things. Mr Twit. Mr Twit was one of these very hairy-faced men. The whole of his face, except for his forehead, his eyes and nose, was covered with thick hair. The stuff even sprouted in revolting tufts out of his nostrils and ear holes. Mr Twit felt that his hairiness made him look terrifically wise and grand, but the truth was he was neither of those things. Mr Twit was a twit. He was born a twit, and now, at the age of 60, he was a bigger twit than ever. The hair on Mr Twit's face didn't grow smooth and matted as it does on most hairy-faced men. It grew in spikes that stuck out straight like the bristles of a nail brush. And how often did Mr Twit wash his bristly, nail-brushy face of his? Well, the answer is never. Not even on Sundays. He hadn't washed his face for years. Dirty beards. As you know, an ordinary, unhairy face like yours or mine simply gets a bit smudgy if it's not washed often enough. And there's nothing so awful about that. But a hairy face is a very different matter. Things cling to hairs, especially food. Things like gravy go right in amongst the hairs and stay there. You and I can wipe our smooth faces with a flannel, and we quickly look more or less all right again. But the hairy man cannot do that. We can also, if we are careful, eat our meals without spreading food all over our faces. But not so the hairy man. Watch carefully next time you see a hairy man eating his lunch, and you will notice that even if he opens his mouth very wide, it is impossible for him to get a spoonful of beef stew or ice cream and chocolate sauce into it without leaving some of it on the hairs. Mr Twit didn't even bother to open his mouth wide when he ate. As a result, and because he never washed, there were always hundreds of bits of old breakfasts and lunches and suppers sticking to the hairs around his face. They weren't big bits, mind you, because he used to wipe those off with the back of his hand or on his sleeve while he was eating. But if you look closely, not that you'd ever want to, you could see tiny specks of dried up scrambled eggs stuck to the hairs, and spinach, and tomato ketchup, and fish fingers, and minced chicken livers, and all the other disgusting things Mr Twit liked to eat. If you got closer still, hold your noses, ladies and gentlemen, if you peered deep into the moustachy bristles sticking out over his upper lip, you would probably see much larger objects that had escaped the wipe of his hand. Things that had been there for months and months, like a piece of maggoty green cheese or mouldy old cornflakes, or even the slimy tail of a tinned sardine. Because of this, Mr Twit never really went hungry. By sticking out his tongue and curling it sideways to explore the hairy jungle around his mouth, he was always able to find a tasty morsel here or there to nibble on. What I'm trying to tell you is that Mr Twit was a foul and smelly old man. He was also an extremely horrid old man, as you will find out in a moment. Mrs Twit. Mrs Twit was no better than her husband. She did not, of course, have a hairy face. It was a pity she didn't, because that, at any rate, would have hidden some of her fearful ugliness. Take a look at her. Have you ever seen a woman with an uglier face than that? I doubt it. But the funny thing is that Mrs Twit wasn't born ugly. She had quite a nice face when she was young. The ugliness had grown upon her year by year as she got older. And why would that happen? Well, I'll tell you why. If a person has ugly thoughts, it begins to show on the face. And when that person has ugly thoughts every day, every week, every year, that face gets uglier and uglier, until it gets so ugly you can hardly bear look at it. A person who has good thoughts can never be ugly. You can have a wonky nose and a crooked mouth and a double chin and stick out teeth, but if you have good thoughts, they will shine out of your face like sunbeams, and you will always look lovely. Nothing shone out of Mrs Twit's face. In her right hand she carried a walking stick. She used to tell people that that was because she had warts growing on the sole of her left foot, and walking was painful. But the real reason she carried a stick was so that she could hit things with it, like dogs and cats and small children. And then there was the glass eye. Mrs Twit had a glass eye, and that was always looking the other way. The glass eye. You can play a lot of tricks with a glass eye, because you can take it out and pop it in again any time you like. You can bet your life Mrs Twit knew all the tricks. One morning, she took out her glass eye and dropped it into Mr Twit's mug of beer when he wasn't looking. Mr Twit sat there drinking the beer slowly. The froth made a white ring on the hairs around his mouth. He wiped the froth on his sleeve and wiped his sleeve on his trousers. "You're plotting something," Mrs Twit said, keeping her back turned so he wouldn't see that she'd taken out her glass eye. "Whenever you go quiet like that, I know very well you're plotting something." Mrs Twit was right. Mr Twit was plotting away like mad. He was trying to think up a really nasty trick he could play on his wife that day. "You'd better be careful," Mrs Twit said, "because when I see you starting to plot, I watch you like a wombat." "Oh, do shut up, you old hag," Mr Twit said. He went on drinking his beer, and his evil mind kept working away on the latest horrid trick he was going to play on the old woman. Suddenly, as Mr Twit tipped the last drop of beer down his throat, he caught sight of Mrs Twit's awful glass eye staring up at him from the bottom of the mug. It made him jump. "I told you I was watching," cackled Mrs Twit. "I've got eyes everywhere, so you should be careful." So we are going to stop there for tonight, guys. But don't worry, we'll be back next week and carrying on with the Twits. As always, I'll be back on Monday doing Write Along Live, and next week it's all about describing words. So, if you haven't joined in yet with that one, please do come along. It's so much fun. But for now, have a lovely weekend, and I'll see you on Monday. Bye-bye.